ever too late to incorporate? So if you find yourself with this $1 million lemonade stand, is it too late, or can you always go in and get the help of a lawyer and get some legal advice to make sure that you're protected?
Well, there's nothing stopping you from incorporating a company at any given time, but there could be some implications, right? There could be tax implications. There could be old skeletons in the closet. So the idea that there's a number of things you would have done as a sole proprietor to get that business to $1 million prior to starting the company. So there would be discussions over who would take liability over any incident that may have taken place while it was still operating as a sole proprietorship. So it's very, in my mind, starting any business without incorporating is a bad idea, period. I mean, I've yet to be convinced otherwise. I've yet to see it ever really work out where the sole proprietorship was the good call.
Welcome to Access to Justice. I'm your host, Heather Malarick of Merrick Law. My co-host is Evan Clark of Kahane Law. Hi, Evan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Heather. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad, thanks. Just back from vacation, so cleaning out the cobwebs a little bit in the inbox, and excited to be back in the host seat.
Nice. I'm trying to clean out my inbox because right after this, I'm supposed to be going for a little bit of a long weekend with the family, doing some camping. So kind of the opposite. And then Monday I'll be dealing with whatever happens tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. We are joined as often today by our very special guest, Kim Mcdonald of Mcdonald Advisory. Kim is a financial advisor and insurance advisor with Raymond James Limited. Hi, Kim. How are you doing?
Hi, Heather. I'm jealous of your fresh mountain glow from your time off. Other than that, we're doing great. Happy to be here today. I think we've got a very interesting guest, so I'll let you get to introducing him.
Yeah, we're excited to welcome today's guest, Nitin Bhatia. Hi, Nitin. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Mr. Bhatia was born in Edmonton and is one of the founding partners of SB LLP. He's the team lead of SB LLP's corporate commercial group. His practice is highly focused on transactional files, both in corporate securities and the banking sector, as well as commercial real estate. He's regularly involved in mortgage financing, leasing, and development work. His experience has led him to work with clients that include land developers, the retail hospitality complex, major financial lenders, small-scale private lenders, chartered banks, credit unions, and mid-sized enterprises, as well as members of the Alberta Real Estate Association. Nitin is also a sessional instructor at the U of A's Faculty of Business and is currently a sessional professor at the University's of Alberta's Faculty of Law in the area of commercial real estate and financing. He also donates his time as a director of the Mortgage Loans Association of Alberta and is a board member of the South Asian Bar Association of Edmonton. He's also a past executive board member of the Manaseva Society and the Edmonton Valley Zoo Development Society. So that's a pretty amazing background, and we're really excited.
I think the podcast is over. That's all the time we have for today.
so many credentials. So we're so excited to have you here to hopefully pick your brain about businesses, which is, I mean, it's a pretty big topic. So, I guess to start us off in the conversation, we're thinking that people that are listening to today's episode are going to be small business owners or people who are thinking about opening a business of their own. What do you think are some of the things that small business owners should know about just getting started up and how lawyers can help in that process?
And thanks for having me on. And Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I think what I tend to want to get out there in terms of the information to people that are looking at starting a business is that it's important for them to understand the role of professionals, whether it be their accountant, whether it be their financial advisor, whether it be their lawyer. Professionals have those particular designations for a reason, and they've existed for so long because there's clearly some value add that they can bring to the table. With respect to the legal side of things, there's just so much to consider right from the get-go. When you think about business, many people out there think that, okay, you hang your shingle somewhere and off you go, and you start selling widgets and you start getting cash, and there you go, you've got yourself a business. But protecting yourself right off the get-go is so important. So things like just understanding the difference between incorporating a company so that you actually have a company as opposed to just operating a business under your personal name. There's a cost associated with incorporating a company. But if you were to incorporate a company, it would be done through the corporate registrar in Alberta. They're the ones who would effectively give your company an assigned number, and it would effectively become its own entity. And the way we treat companies in Alberta and in Canada as a whole is that each company is actually its own physical entity. It's almost its own person, which means that that company is responsible for its actions. And why that's so important is that if you were to run a sole proprietorship, which is basically you operating a business without incorporating a company or setting anything up, is that company is then just you as a sole proprietor, which means any decision you make on behalf of a sole proprietorship, you're liable for. So you make a mistake and you get sued, that's on you. You no longer have the protection of the company being the party that is effectively the shield. Similarly, if you were to go get a bank loan, you'd be getting a personal bank loan. It wouldn't be a bank loan to your company because the company and yourself are one. So just that alone is such a major topic of debate amongst so many people who don't really know the difference and have never really had to look into it. There tends to be multiple ways of opening a company, right? Some people, it's by sheer luck. They started a lemonade stand and people just continued to show up. They didn't ever think they were going to make more than a few $100s, so they never thought about going and incorporating a company. Next thing you know, that thing is turned into something, and now they're kind of working backwards just to get everything set up. So incorporation is the number one step.
I had a follow-up question to that. Is it ever too late to incorporate? So if you find yourself with this $1 million lemonade stand, is it too late, or can you always go in and get the help of a lawyer and get some legal advice to make sure that you're protected?
Well, there's nothing stopping you from incorporating a company at any given time, but there could be some implications, right? There could be tax implications. There could be old skeletons in the closet. So the idea that there's a number of things you would have done as a sole proprietor to get that business to $1 million prior to starting the company. So there would be discussions over who would take liability over any incident that may have taken place while it was still operating as a sole proprietorship. So it's very, in my mind, starting any business without incorporating is a bad idea, period. I mean, I've yet to be convinced otherwise. I've yet to see it ever really work out where the sole proprietorship was the good call. Again, we're not talking about a person who's, like a children's musician who's doing like a music show at a birthday party once a week. And even that is probably filled with liabilities, right? Someone trips over a wire, or the music is too loud and it bursts someone's eardrum. Suddenly there's a lawsuit and the person is personally responsible.
Sorry, go ahead, Evan.
So Nitin, I started as a sole proprietor, and but you know what? It didn't last very long before I incorporated, and I did that deliberately. There's a couple of reasons, I guess. As lawyers, we don't benefit from the same liability protection that other people do when they incorporate, which maybe we can talk about in a second. And so I had to have liability insurance anyways. And then the tax implications when you're starting out, you're not getting the tax benefits of a corporation. So there was I could, as I'm losing money as I'm starting the business, that washes right through to my personal income tax. But I mean, I agree with you, because as soon as it was financially viable, I incorporated. And anyone who's not starting a professional corporation, which we can unpack as well in a sec. I know we're kind of using some terms that not everyone will understand or know what they mean. For your normal everyday business corporation, the corporation for that is going to provide that protection right away. Another thing I thought of, Nathan, was a potential issue that could arise if you start and then years later, when you've already got $1 million business going, you go to incorporate, is you're probably going to have contracts. And if they don't have a clause in there that just allows you to assign it without any kind of, issues, that could be an issue where you have to renegotiate contracts now in the corporation, in the corporate name, right?
There's a whole host of issues, really. Liabilities are one aspect. Practicality, like you're discussing, the practical nature of assigning contracts or anything, that's a huge issue of its own. So yeah, I mean, in your circumstances, it made sense to try the sole proprietorship first while you tried to basically feel the waters and figure out what you were going to do. But I assume now you're no longer in that circumstance, because having a financially viable business, and now that you have an idea what exactly it is you're doing, it makes complete sense to be protected with certain, at least the tax benefits of a PC. I agree with you. In certain professions, you don't get to avoid personal liability if you do make an error, and of course, law is one of those professions. However, I would say, I just point out that had you not had a general liability insurance period, and you were operating a sole proprietorship, and someone walked into your office and tripped and hit their head, your loss society insurance wasn't going to cover that. Right. So like, that's, again, it's one of those things where there's a million things that could happen. And what's realistic and what's not is a different story. But
it's kind of the exception that proves the rule, right? Like, okay, you said you could never think of one. Oh, I found one, but it's so unique that, I think what you said is absolutely right, that for the vast majority of people starting a business, you're going to want that protection right away. So how much does it cost to incorporate?
I mean, it'll range if you go to a law firm or if you were to go to a registry, but a law firm, the typical fees are $500 to $600 plus any registration costs. I think anyone should budget around $1,000 all in, and that would cover setting up the company, setting up its corporate minutes, which is a very important and kind of mundane and archaic concept, but it's still required by law. The Business Corporations Act requires us to have minute books. So a law firm would set that up for you, and that's what would have your share certificates. So that's what basically proves your ownership in the company. So lawyers would set that all up, and roughly $1,000.
Yeah, but now, you mentioned registry fees. Like, can't anyone just walk down to their local registry? Do whatever search they need to do, we call it a nuance search, and then register their own corporation? Why do they need lawyers?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, no, absolutely, it's possible. You can do it, but you can drive your car with 2 feet. It doesn't make it a good idea. Right? Like, at the end of the day, there's a reason why we are equipped with the skill set to do what we do. We've learned how to do it. We ensure that it's done right. That being said, I'd be completely disingenuous if I said that there aren't circumstances where going to the registry and incorporating wouldn't make sense, right? I think that if it's a small enough business, you're a one-person show, you're your sole director and sole shareholder. I mean, technically, you could probably get away with just doing it at the registry, though your savings are not big enough to justify that, in my opinion. You'll save a couple of $100s, but the peace of mind you'll have by making sure it's done right and set up right in the first place is huge. I'll give you a very small example of where it actually pays off financially as well. So you pay an extra $200 basically to a law firm to get it done. If we set up a company with the right bylaws, the right articles of incorporation, this basically has a lot to do with the rules that follow your different shares in your company. It can get very complicated, but ultimately, if we set it up right, you've already got these articles that have basically been worked on for years and years and years and refined for years and years and years to adapt to the current market, the current tax environment. Whereas if you go to the registry, you get a 5-page document, which is your articles, and it's the most run-of-the-mill. So where this plays a role is tomorrow, if you're selling the shares of your company or you're doing some kind of tax reorganization, this is, again, if you've become very successful, tax reorganization is almost a guarantee to happen in your company's lifetime. You are going to pay thousands of extra dollars to a law firm to first fix your articles to bring it up to speed to where it should be, and then make the necessary changes to allow for it prior to even getting the tax reorganization done. I've dealt with this many times, and financially has been great. Is someone decided to go to a registry and then afterwards come to us later, and we've been able to actually make a good money fixing their mistakes. But why make the mistake in the first place? For those extra couple $100, you're good. And this kind of ties into a little bit, Kim, you might have seen this as a financial advisor, but you may have seen people who have written their own wills instead of hiring a lawyer to do it. And wills cost almost nothing. I mean, in reality, for what you're trying to protect is a couple $100, maybe $500 for a will to be done. And if you do it incorrectly and suddenly you have a family fighting in court over the validity of a will, how much money do you think they're spending on lawyers?
Yeah, they're spending thousands and thousands and thousands. And guess what it's coming out of? The estate.
Yeah. So the same estate you were trying to protect is now called, the estate is spending all this money to manage a fight that could have been prevented by a $500 or $600 document. Yeah. So yeah, it comes down to, at the end of the day, it's not that money is scarce and everybody needs it and nobody wants to necessarily spend it if they don't have to. But the moral of my story here is, you want to start a business, you have to spend that money. Go get that incorporation done. It'll save many headaches in the future.
Yeah, I have something to add to that. And then I have a question for you. So in a previous life, I had a different business, a tile installation business. And I knew enough about business to know that we wanted to incorporate. We wanted that protection of the corporate veil, which is going to be my question to you. And so we knew we needed to get a corporation. And, I'm a big do-it-yourselfer kind of guy. So didn't have any money. So, we did all the steps, followed the instructions online. This is in British Columbia, and we started the corporation. Now looking back, we didn't have a minute book. We didn't know any idea about resolutions you're supposed to be doing. We didn't even issue share certificates. No registries. We were totally non-compliant with the British Columbia, whatever their act is called. Yeah. I'm good at reading stuff and understanding and doing it on my own, but I totally screwed that up and kind of missed the point. And if that business had been successful and I didn't end up going to law school and becoming a lawyer, I would have been paying a lot more money later. Yeah. My question is, I mentioned the corporate veil, and we've kind of talked about it, but could you just give us a corporations 101 definition of what do people mean when they talk about the corporate veil? So, consider that comment I made earlier, which is that when you're incorporated, you're effectively a separate entity. So the corporation is its own entity, and you are a separate person. So you're not necessarily responsible for what this other entity has done. And we're talking about on a personal level. So best examples of that is again, the trip and fall, the example I was giving earlier. But you're operating a business, but that business is an incorporated entity, and someone comes into your facility and slips and falls and hurts themselves. That's no longer
Evan Clark's responsibility in terms of it coming out of Evan's personal pocketbook. It comes out of the company's pocketbook and the company's insurance policy. So you're protected from certain wrongdoings, but not everything. Because you'll still be a director in your corporation, so you will be the controlling mind of your corporation or the incorporated entity. There are certain things that you cannot avoid personal liability on, but they're very extreme. So gross negligence causing certain types of harm or fraud. Those are the type of things that you would still, as a director, be liable for. There's also our good old government that'll make sure that certain taxes you remain personally liable for, even if your company can't pay it. But there's still such a wide range of protections by having the corporate entity when it comes to lawsuits. So similarly, your company can't afford to pay a bill to some other company and the company gets sued. It's at least the company getting sued and not you personally. So if the company is defunct, that company's gone, it's over. Your life continues on and your personal assets haven't been affected. But if you were operating as a sole proprietor without a company, you would be stuck with that liability to pay that invoice, even if you were doing it for your business.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a perfect explanation. I don't want to dominate here, Heather and Kim.
Oh, I've got a good one. So financial professionals bump up against accountants, bump up against lawyers. We're all kind of trying to figure out what the right process is, who has the answers, and how we're supposed to go forward. Yeah. So Nitin, I'll put you on the spot and say, what kind of advice would you give to an accountant and a financial professional in terms of looking at corporate structures and asking the right questions? Because a lot of people just kind of, like you alluded to before, they kind of toss their business together. They've got the accountant's kind of doing some of the work. We're not sure if they're doing everything properly. Financial advisors taking marching orders from the accountant, and maybe the lawyer should be brought in. I'm curious what you have to tell us about what we should do.
Well, I think that this comes back to the first comment I made, which is the importance of hiring the right professionals. So I think a good accountant, a professional accountant, and a good financial planner, would be already aware of the fact that it's probably a good idea to bring the lawyer into the discussion. Similarly, I think that a good lawyer would know when to tell their client that's important for them to get good accounting advice and financial advice. So yeah, I think right off the bat, I think bringing in a lawyer is a great idea, but it's important for you to also be aware of your skill set. So, accounting is a very interesting field because there are different types of accountants out there. It's one thing to have a CPA designation and be a practicing accountant, but there are a lot of folks out there that are bookkeepers who are still allowed to call themselves accountants, but they're not actually designated. And that doesn't take away from them. Bookkeepers are very good at what they do, but that's bookkeeping. Right, but bookkeepers are not meant to be planning out what your corporate structure should look like. And similarly for financial advisors, it's one thing if you're a wealth advisor and a financial planner, you have an idea of the area that you're working in, which is great. But if it's not the area you typically do, right? If you're more involved in selling life insurance, then probably don't talk about corporate planning in much detail and bring in the right people. So I think it's important for all of us to use each other and make sure that the right skill sets are being employed. I can tell you I am not a tax advisor. I do some tax law, but I do that in conjunction with accountants that spend all day long doing tax reorganization or tax work for their clients. There are lots of designated accountants that don't do tax work at all, and so they would not be the people I would call upon to come in.
So how do we find the good ones?
Yeah, I know that's a tough one, right? But word of mouth, right? I think that's the we're talking about small businesses and how do they grow, really? Like, I mean, there's advertising, but I think word of mouth referrals have always been the best form of referral out there in the business. And I think that people are very helpful. it's very rare that you encounter someone and ask them for directions and they don't at least try to point you in the right spot, even if they don't know where they're pointing you to. I think that similarly, if you are, if you're a layman, let's say someone who doesn't necessarily have any of the designations and says, I really need to get my life in order and I want to hire a lawyer, an accountant, a financial planner, where do I start? There are some great resources, but I think people are very intimidated by picking up the phone and just calling someone in those industries. I get cold calls all the time, though, and when I do, if I don't do that area of work, I'm happy to refer them to someone I know that does. So I think it's a great start is just pick up the phone and develop some comfort there. And I think people should be honest about what they know how to do and what they don't know how to do. But you'll still, once in a while encounter the folks that do electrical work when they're really just a plumber, et cetera. Like it happens. It's similar in law. Law has hundreds of areas. And, I would never go into court representing a murderer, an accused murderer, because I'd be really worried about them ending up in jail because I wouldn't know the first thing about that area of work. So.
Nice. So I think you've covered a lot about basics of business law and things that business people face as they're starting out. Let's go stray just a little bit from the legal side of business to kind of business side of business. Especially thinking yourself as a business person, with the market constantly changing, what are some new challenges or areas of law that are emerging related to that?
Yeah, I think the emergence of certain areas of law when it comes to tech and also lifestyle have really changed how we have to approach the practice of law, and then also how business owners have to approach their businesses. Social media is probably the best and easiest example to use. Social media marketing and so the use of social media itself in connection with businesses, it's a whole new world. Everything from the liabilities arising out of that to what can actually be trademarked, what can actually be protected as intellectual property. How does defamation work in the context of social media? How do we ensure that we're not in a situation where we're accused of misleading customers or misleading the public or anything with some of the advertisements that we might want to throw on a 100 and I don't know if it's 140 or 160 character tweet. So what I find is this area is very unexplored. Lawyers as a whole we're very conservative people, and our industry is so conservative, right? Everything is precedent based. Everything is, this is how we did it then, this is how we do it now. But the thing is back then we didn't have this stuff. So how do we deal with these issues? And we're starting to see cases come in where we're representing a client on a litigious matter, and there's cyberbullying going on, and between parties, and you're trying to understand what is actually allowable cyberbullying and what actually crosses the line and gets into what's considered a published work, and could certainly start to fall more within a defamation criteria. So social media is definitely one whole ambit of work. I think, Heather, actually, you in family law, I've heard, we've got some family lawyers at our firm too. I hear some very interesting cases about what an angry spouse will put on Facebook. And I always wonder about how that gets dealt with, because that's not really part of the divorce proceedings, but it could turn into something else.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never had the, I'm echoing really badly. I'm sorry to aside there. I've never had anything go onto the civil side of things as far as defamation goes, but certainly a standard directive to my clients is just keep it off of social media. Don't put any of that stuff on there, because it's just not the right forum for it. But
What is the right forum, Heather?
Well, A-B conversations. That's what I always say. That's an A and B conversation.
Yeah.
You know, C shouldn't be involved. There should be no C in those conversations. But
And like I know that I've had very little involvement in family law files, but I recall a specific file that I saw that came across my desk where part of the evidence provided to court with respect to one of the spouse's stability was printed copies of their various Facebook posts. And so I think people should be really cautious and understand that they might be emotional in the moment and they might actually be completely stable. But if they post a series of tweets that come from a place of emotion, it's very easy to establish that maybe they have some stability issues, right?
right, it can look bad or not as it's meant to if you're posting your 2 a.m. thoughts to the public rather than into your diary, maybe where they better belong.
Yeah. So don't drunk dial Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. That should be posted on every family lawyer's retainer agreement.
It does make me think of that's one more reason, though, why folks might want to come to see you really early on too when they're starting a business, so that they can talk about those aspects as well with you when they're setting up their corporate structure. How does if at all, is my spouse involved in this? What does it look like if our relationship doesn't make it? Or my kids, can they be shareholders? Are they involved in the corporate structure? And to get advice on those kinds of things as well.
No, that's a great point. Yeah.
What's the responsibility of a lawyer to explain corporate structures? Because, and I'm thinking about this right now as I was pondering small legal firms versus big legal firms. And I've seen some really incredibly complex corporate structures that I know my clients do not understand. But the lawyers have put them together. They make a whole pile of sense to the lawyers. They probably are the right thing. What's your professional requirements in terms of explaining these structures and how they stand the test of time?
I think it's so hard to have a one size fits all in terms of exactly how deep you go in the explanation of the structures. But I think it's still incumbent on you as the advisor to give what you believe to be the relevant information to the client for their particular circumstances. Right. So again, we come back to the example of a person who's sole director, sole shareholder, probably operating a small business. If we still give them a set of our complex articles and all that, that's fine. It still works for them. What do they really need to know about the complexity of those articles? Now, that's a subject of I think every lawyer would have a different answer for that. In my opinion, I would say that they need to know what's relevant for what they're doing right now, but they should also be told that they've been set up in a way so that in the future, if things do get complicated with the company, that at least we've already got them on the right ship here, and that we'll be able to navigate the waters with that. I think that's really important. Really going through and explaining what Series F preferred shares are and how they can be converted into so like. To a person who's, let's say, opening up again a lemonade stand using that company, they're not going to really care, and B, they're going to be fairly upset if all of a sudden this turns into a 5-hour meeting, right? So. Right.
Yeah, and a lot of the share structure specifically, I think that becomes important when you're adding people to the company that are going to own part of the company. Yeah. And so I guess if they're like the simple guy, it might be enough, for example, Kim, to let them know, if you're thinking about having somebody come on board to the company and buy into the company and own part of the company, we should talk at that point. But you're set up, you wouldn't have to do anything structurally to the corporation kind of thing. Nitin, perhaps you could, something that I come across frequently with people that aren't lawyers thinking about corporations is, and I get it because this is a confusing kind of thing, kind of the difference between a shareholder, a director, and an officer.
Okay. Yeah, so shareholders are the actual owners of the corporation. So a shareholder actually owns a share of the corporation. what that makeup is like is based entirely on what ends up getting set up between the various owners. A director is basically an elected position. He or she is elected by the shareholders of the company, and they're appointed to basically manage the direction of the corporation. So they are considered the controlling mind of the company. They make the decisions, the hiring, the firing, etc. And then you've got the officers. So the officers are actually appointed positions. So whether it be president, secretary, treasurer. In Alberta's laws generally, it's not really that relevant. Whether whether your officer's position is president, secretary, treasurer, it has more so relevance with respect to what I want to call irrelevant documentation. So there are resolutions that can only be signed by the secretary, etc. But there's no added power in any of those positions. And where things could potentially be altered from what I'm saying, or where we can deviate a little bit from what I'm saying, is there's nothing stopping you from creating an agreement between the shareholders as to whether there is more relevance in any of these positions. So they normally call these agreements unanimous shareholder agreements. So short form lawyers will always say USAs. So a USA is basically an agreement that's going to govern the dealings of the corporation, specifically the rights and liabilities that the shareholders all have. And what that agreement can typically speak to is things like what happens if a shareholder dies, what happens to their shares, or what decisions can be made by the majority of shareholders as opposed to what decisions can only be made by unanimous consent. Who are the appointed managers and the directors of the corporation? Are there any permanent positions? So there may be certain shareholders who started the corporation that say, as long as I own shares in this company, I will always be elected to the director position in the board. These are the type of things that can be spelled out in an agreement called the Unanimous Shareholders Agreement. So a very important agreement if there's ever going to be more than one shareholder in a company. And again, a good lawyer, a good accountant, good advisor would make sure that their clients are aware that such agreements even exist and that they should consider doing them.
Is that where the shotgun clause goes? I find people are really like that phrase, the shotgun clause. Yeah. Is that?
Yeah, pretty much everybody knows that one term, and that term is actually super relevant in the Unanimous Shareholder Agreement. So to put it in very simple terms, shotgun clause, the whole concept behind it is that a company should never be in a stalemate. So if shareholders are not in agreement, someone's got to go. The whole idea is that the shareholders that are opposing each other are basically facing off with a shotgun against each other. And if one pulls the trigger and misses, then the other shareholders got it. Right. So to put that into context of what we're talking about, a shareholder dispute, if we'll just use the example of Evan and I. If Evan owns 50 shares and I own 50 shares in a company, and we both see the company going in two different directions, and we have a shotgun clause in place, the rules of the shotgun clause would suggest that I could go to Evan and say, look, Evan, I'm going to buy your 50 shares for $1,000. And if Evan says no, he's obligated to buy my shares for that same amount. So the good thing about the shotgun clause is it allows for there to be a fair offer, because I'm taking the shot, and if I miss, Evan gets to take that shot right back at me.
Right.
So that's the value of a clause like that, and it's just one of the various things that would be in an agreement like that. There's buy-sell provisions which talk about what happens in the event of certain unforeseen circumstances, which would trigger the potential sale of the shares. So best examples of that I can give, right, probably the most relevant would be someone dying. Right, someone passes away, what happens to their shares? A unanimous shareholder agreement will actually deal with what happens with it. Whereas if you don't have a unanimous shareholder agreement and a shareholder was to die, their estate actually takes ownership of those shares. And that might not be what you as another partner of them wants, and it could create some stagnation within the company. So So a very important agreement, and pretty much it's very rare where someone would come into or it should be very rare where someone comes into a law office with a group of partners wanting to set up a company and leaves without one. You should that should be considered part and parcel with the incorporation.
Yeah. 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And I guess people love the vision of the shotgun standoff.
Yeah.
But it's not, you can get into trouble with that too. Lest anyone think that, all I need is USA and a shotgun clause and we're good.
Yeah.
That shotgun clause is perfect where there's equal bargaining power, equal financial resources. What could happen, that could be something to watch out for, is where you have somebody who, like, Nitin's got millions of dollars and I only have thousands of dollars. Nitin would have the ability to offer me something out of my range that I couldn't afford that perhaps is still undervalues the shares.
Yeah. Though it's still a gamble on my part, because there's nothing, I have no idea if you have a rich uncle, or if you have, or if you can put together a group of other people who say, hey, we'll pool our money because this is a great deal. He's trying to screw you, but here's our opportunity to get him back. So, I mean, it comes with its gamble. Your point is well taken in the sense that, if Nitin knows enough about Evan and thinks that there's no chance that he can put this money together, then maybe he pulls a fast one. But I think that's I haven't actually seen that happen. I've actually been involved in plenty of shareholder dispute matters, and to this day I don't think I've ever seen a shotgun trigger happen where one person was in a very advantageous position. Where the advantage lies is in key man, or if one person is absolutely relevant to the company and is doing all the work and doing all the heavy lifting, the other person is just an investor, that person that does all the work probably has an advantage over the one that doesn't, because they actually know the operation of the business. So it may not be a fair circumstance where it could very well be that a shareholder comes forward and says, I'm going to underpay you for your shares, because in reality, if you don't have me, you don't have a company. I mean, again, what would that look like? I don't know. Like, imagine if the company was actually named after that person, right? And so, and the brand is in their name. Mm-hmm. Do you need them? And so they have the bargaining power there for sure.
I have a question coming up out of that. So you mentioned shareholder disputes. So, I mean, these agreements, like all agreements, are there to try and anticipate problems and resolve them in advance, so that if there is a disagreement, you can go to the agreement and try and resolve it. But if you have a few shareholders who can't quite come to a consensus on something, what are the things that are available to help those shareholders try and work through a disagreement without triggering the shotgun or pulling the trigger on the shotgun?
I mean, I don't know if there's much you can do in terms of the documentation of it within an agreement, but I think that knowing that the threat of things getting to a stage where a shotgun is pulled is usually enough for people to realize that either we got to make this work or it's going that route. Okay. And so it comes down to a method of compromise. Now, that being said, your shareholder agreement can certainly outline what are tiebreakers and methodologies for tiebreakers, so that things can always move forward, right? That's definitely within a lawyer's ability to draft and all that. And I remember, it's been a long time, but I remember seeing one agreement which actually had a coin toss provision in it, which actually said that a coin toss by a party chosen by the shareholders, and that would be the deciding factor if there was ever a circumstance where they were stuck right in the middle on something.
Do people ever use mediation or any of those other sorts of tools to help them through disputes?
I think so. I think that there's a place for it, and I think that arbitration and mediation are growing areas and should be explored more in our in business for multiple reasons. Right, we have clogged up courtrooms. Getting justice is not fast anymore. So sometimes you can't wait for 2 years for something to get resolved. Similarly, I think that people have less affordability. It's probably a factor of a couple of things. Lawyers are charging more because their own costs have gone up.
Mhm.
And so suddenly paying $400 an hour to resolve a dispute over something that really is contractual might be easier to resolve in a mediation that has a fixed fee component to it. I think that we should all be encouraging mediation, even if it's not formal in nature. I think that litigators should be talking more about having roundtable conferences. Kind of ties into a lot of what you do, Heather, with the collaborative family law approach, which is to say, hey, like, we could probably get past most of these issues by having the two lawyers and the two spouses in a room. And if we can at least hammer out 90% of it, then what's left is just 10%. And if we can't solve that between each other, at least it's a small enough item to deal with for a court to decide on in a quicker trial or application.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a parallel there and that these are relationships as well. They're not family relationships necessarily, although sometimes they are, but they are relationships. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, I think that the courts have been really good about forcing a lot of litigation to go into mediation. So I think that's more in small claims courts. So matters of under $100,000 where there's a civil claim. There seems to be a lot of encouragement now that it has to go through a number of steps. There's a pretrial conference, but there's also a mediation that's usually recommended, or a judicial dispute resolution. And you're seeing a lot of cases get resolved before they get to trial because parties start to understand more and more about each other's position, but also get to understand the evidence before them.
Right.
So yeah, when it comes to corporations, I think if we look at arbitration in the context of corporations, when it's within the same company, so you're not really suing somebody else, it's just shareholders between each other having a dispute. You would think that for the better good financially of the company, they would find a way to shake on it and figure out a compromise, though it doesn't always happen, and we see enough of things where things fall apart as well. But even when things fall apart, you don't normally see that. I'm trying to think of the term, but basically the burnt to the ground approach, really, which is I don't think people want the company to go to zero. I think the shareholders might be having a problem, but they want to see the company live. And so at some point they know they have to compromise. Otherwise, scorched earth is what I was going with. But otherwise you go scorched earth and you let the whole thing sink, right? But then there's nothing left to fight about.
Right.
So hopefully before they get to the dispute resolution phase, the company is growing.
Yeah.
And then yourself as a businessman who has started your own firm and grown it into a mid-sized firm, what are some tips for how to grow and manage the growth?
Yeah, like I think that the biggest thing is understanding your limitations as a person. You can't do everything by yourself. So building a good team of talent around you is super important. I was giving an example earlier about the plumber doing the electrical work. When you first start a business, especially a professional practice, I think Heather and Evan, you both are in that world. And Kim, I think you're doing a lot of your own self-development within your company there. One thing that I find is the biggest challenge is we only have so much money and we only have so much time. And so you can't just hire all of the best of everything and have them all sitting here ready to do something when you only have maybe 10 clients to begin with, right? But understanding your limitations early is very important. So having good professional advisors, again, so get the right accountant backing you, get the right IT people, because IT is everything in business today, right? And then, surrounding yourself with the right support. So in law firms, we depend so much on our assistants, cheaping out on hiring people that maybe aren't right for the job is a surefire way to fail. Similarly, hiring someone who's got a very good skill set in one particular area and forcing them to do something they don't know how to do is also a really bad idea. So building talent and having the right professionals around you would be my number one tip. And my number two tip, which is a very close second, is having good systems in place. And systems can mean a ton of things, but procedures for everything, so that there's one way to do it all. Not only can you streamline a lot of things, you can also scale it. So growth comes by you being able to not have 100 hands and not be obligated to do everything. Because if I can tell you, when we first started our firm, I was our pseudo bookkeeper. I was our pseudo IT guy. I also had a tool set because I somehow knew how to put desks together and take them apart. I was hanging picture frames, and you don't realize it at the time, because let's say you have 3 or 4 clients to start with. You're like, well, I have time to do this. But why are you putting that time towards things that other people can do way quicker than you and way better than you? That time should have been spent marketing and building your business and going on the correct lunches and spending time building your brand. And I've learned that over the years, and I still have really bad habits for it. I think that it's a running joke in the office, but I think everybody kind of knows me as the one who's a little bit more financially conservative in the firm. As I was one of 2 founding partners, and the other partner, he wouldn't mind me saying this at all, but I don't think he ever looks at the bill. Like if he wants something, he gets it, and then we deal with the consequences afterwards. And so we have a running joke that if it's something that everybody at the firm really wants, don't bring that bill to me, bring it to him. And then I'll be the one to figure out how we're paying for it. And so, but I think understanding that you can't do everything is super important. And scaling is now the way of the future again. I mean, look at where competition is very, very big in our field. Quite honestly, a lot of the work we do as lawyers is not rocket science. There's some stuff that's very complicated, and we need to be advisors and really need to be working in an advisory capacity. But there's a lot of work that doesn't really require 14 years of practice or 20 years of practice. And so we're going to get eaten up by competition if we keep our minds narrow. If we only focus on the commodities. So just say, okay, and we talked about it, but like a very straightforward will, right? Where there's nothing complicated going on. You know what? A first-year lawyer can probably do it just fine as a 50-year lawyer, right? As long as they've had the right training. But if you're still 50 years into your practice, still trying to fight for that file, for that simple will that doesn't really need you to work on it, then you probably did something, this is my own opinion, but you probably did something wrong in your practice. At some point, you went the route of taking the easy route instead of becoming more of an advisor. I think all 4 of us are in fields that I think we want to be better and better. I think we want to take on challenges. We want to become smarter in our advice, and we want people to value our advice for the hourly rate that we're going to charge. So I would feel terrible charging someone $400 or $500 an hour to sit down and go over something that I know I can send my first-year associate into the room to help them with, because it's more money out of their pocket that they didn't have to pay for. I should be focusing my time on advice at the level of experience that I now have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's a long time to understand your value. And it sounds like you've specialized Nitin, what areas have you specialized in, and where do you see niches forming in the legal space?
Well, lawyers are not specialists, Kim. We can never.
Yeah.
It's a very dangerous word for us.
Yeah, it's dangerous in so many ways, right? I think that I think that I found niche areas that I enjoy working on, and so I try really hard to focus on just getting more of that work and getting challenges within those areas of work. So I do a lot of commercial real estate work and a lot of bank financing, and those are my two areas I enjoy doing the most. And I find that I now possess enough knowledge and skill in there where I truly do believe that I have a competitive edge over my competition. And then there are other areas of law that I like doing because I just enjoy doing them. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily number one at it, but I think that I know it enough to be able to give proper and prudent advice. But again, if you think about taking back to the whole growth idea, adding the right talent around you covers up for what you don't know. So if you take on a file which initially you think you can handle, and suddenly you realize that this is actually a lot more complicated, needs more experience, it's nice to have a team of 10 or 15 lawyers around you, because chances are there's someone that has that experience that you can then go to and ask for help, or transition the file to them so that they can take it on. But yeah, so my areas are where they are, but I do definitely do a fair number of areas. Heather was kind enough to read out a lot of them in the opening there, but it's partly because I like learning. I like to stay in the know of it. I still try and make it into a courtroom at least once a year, just to know and remember what it feels like. Otherwise, the type of work I do would typically never see me in a courtroom.
So I'm glad you mentioned in the beginning the biography, because there is some of the things that Heather mentioned in your intro were about the communities that you are a part of. So I'm looking at them here. We have, you're at the University of Alberta. You're on the Faculty of Business and the Faculty of Law. Mm-hmm. You serve as a director with the Mortgage Loans Association of Alberta and a board member with the South Asian Bar Association, and a past board executive with the, I hope I say this right, the Manas Seva?
Yeah, Manas Seva, yeah.
Manas Seva Society,
yeah.
And Edmonton Valley Zoo Development Society. What role would you say your involvement in those communities, and feel free to speak to any of those communities, what role would you say your involvement with those communities has played in your business?
Well, I think the best way to market yourself is to put yourself out there and find people that are familiar to you, because they're going to feel like you're approachable. And approachability is a big issue in our field that we can get to in a moment. But ultimately, if you're coaching, I mean, there's things I didn't throw on there, but like I'm a coach on my kids' hockey team, right? If you're coaching the team, the parents all already have a certain level of trust with you. So now they know that you're also a lawyer. There's already a rapport built, right? If they need something, they can call you. Similarly, any of these associations. So the Edmonton Valley Zoo Development Society was a really cool experience. It was years ago, but the Valley Zoo that we now have, when I joined, we didn't. When I joined, it was under construction. It was the old Valley Zoo, and so if any of you have been there recently, you'll see it's just amazing now. It's beautiful. It's state of the art type of zoo, especially for a Canadian zoo.
So are you responsible for bringing in the elephants?
No, and that's a dangerous topic to get into. But no, I actually I was more involved. So the Development Society was involved in making sure that we would meet the necessary targets to allow for the municipal funding to continue to flow. So the zoo, we didn't operate the zoo, but the operator of the zoo would report to us. So and we wouldn't give much direction. It's not like we would direct like how to deal with the animals and all. But our job was to make sure that we were hitting our targets so that the city continued to believe this was a viable investment. And invest in the completion of the construction that we now see today, and to make it a proper city facility. So So it was neat because it was the first time I was on it was a pseudo municipal board. So there was a lot of involvement with the city. And it was interesting to see because there's obviously some bureaucracies and all that. But what I got from that was I got exposed to a group of people that I don't think I would have ever met in my life. Like there would have been no real reason for us to all cross paths. And so, yeah, does it turn into clientele? Does it turn into knowledge? Yes. So you learn more about governance so you can advise clients about it. And you meet more people who could potentially be clients or referral partners. So what role does it play in developing the business? Just putting yourself in there, you absorb, you become a sponge and you absorb everything that's going out. And hopefully you show yourself as being a competent person where people start to develop rapport with you and trust with you. So the Valley Zoo was a big one. And the U of A, of course, teaching at the U of A is very rewarding. You're instructing your future peers. And so hopefully if I did an average job, at least in teaching them, that they've come out with at least a little bit of deference to what I may say about a particular topic, which helps when we're negotiating against one another down the road. And I actually have a number of students that are now my colleagues who I do files with regularly, and so it's pretty neat to talk to them and see that they've also got the same skill set, really. And so they're no longer your students. So when you're dealing with them on a file, there's a certain element of pride, so to speak, when you see that they're doing a good job on their end too. So and again, I get referrals from them all the time. So some of them didn't end up going into commercial real estate work, but they took my class. So now when they get a call from a client saying, I need this done, they turn to me. So that's an added advantage for your business and your development as well, is again, just putting yourself out there, being known.
Yeah. And so you are not an immigrant. My wife is an immigrant. She immigrated from Spain. I imported her, I like to say. But you, were your parents immigrants?
Yeah. So my parents both moved here. My dad in the 70s and my mom in 1980. From
India, both of them?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so you're also, we mentioned one of the organizations you're involved in, two, with the South Asian Bar Association, and I'm assuming the Mana Seva Society is also something to do with the Indo-Canadian community.
Yeah, so the Mana Seva is a really cool organization. They've been around for a long time. They raise money through 3 or 4 events a year, and the money is distributed to building out schools in remote villages in India, and to support inner city schools in Edmonton. So they always make a pretty sizable donation to inner city schools in Edmonton, but then a good chunk of their donations are raised to build schools. So while I was there, the school converted from grade 1 to 6 to grade 1 to 12. Wow. And that was a pretty neat thing. And then how we can sustain and support those towns. So helping getting them farming equipment so that their kids wouldn't have to work on the farms. So by buying them a tractor, they could send the whole village. You could buy the whole village one tractor, and now they didn't need any of the children to work on the farm anymore. Their children could come to school. So that was a really cool thing to be a part of. And South Asian Bar Association started right before COVID, unfortunately. And so we had our grand opening gala meeting that everyone was excited about, and then we haven't really been able to do a whole lot. There's been a couple of mail outs, but this is a very good organization that is mirroring Saba across North America. So there is Saba pretty much everywhere. Edmonton was one of the few cities that didn't have it. So I was able to be one of the founding board members of that. And basically South Asian members of the South Asian community that are part of the legal bar.
So that's remarkable that Saba did not have a chapter here, because Edmonton has a pretty strong South Asian community, I would say. So have you seen, considering there wasn't enough of I guess, legal community to have a SABA chapter here before. Have you seen access to justice issues in the South Asian, like Indo-Canadian community and other, visible minority communities?
Well, absolutely. I think that there are so many areas that have access to justice issues, but also issues for minorities in the world of law, period. Right. So if you want to go on a grander scale, access to justice in its truest form, which is being able to have your day in court. Right. We look at it and again, growing up Canadian, I was born and raised here. Sure, I knew that I wasn't necessarily the same color as the majority of the population, but I never really felt like an outsider. I was Canadian. I played hockey. I had my bacon and waffles in the morning. I had the whole deal, right? But what I found is that I've represented a number of people over the last 13 years who are new immigrants into the country, who maybe don't speak the language very well, who don't necessarily dress exactly like we do, in like the average Edmontonian would. I've seen them struggle with the idea and the intimidation that they've had with going into a courtroom. And when you talk to them about why they're so nervous, I've had clients shivering to not wanting to go inside a courtroom, and their explanation is, it really hits you, where you realize, where they say, like, they walk in and they don't expect to get justice because nothing is familiar to them, and they feel they're not familiar to anyone else. They walk into the courtroom, and you look at the lawyer that's sitting at the other table, and let's say it's I'm being casual about it, but like a slim, clean-cut white guy, right? And they look at the lawyer on the other side of the table, who's also a slim, clean-cut white guy, and then they look straight at the judge, and he just looks like an older version of those two guys. And now you have a guy in there who says, how are they ever going to be compassionate about my situation? How could they empathize with anything that I've gone through? And they probably don't understand me. They probably don't even like me. Like, again, whether this is fair or not is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that they didn't get justice, right? But it's the intimidation of whether they feel comfortable enough there. So for them, that comfort wasn't there. The mere fact that I was brown-skinned, I can speak Hindi and Punjabi, but I also speak English the way the rest of us speak English in Canada if you were born here. And I dress like your average lawyer would in Edmonton, all that gave them so much comfort, because now they're like, oh, well, you can understand me, but you also understand the system, and they're giving you the same level of respect as the next person, because you're called to this bar, you're able to present before the court, and you also know the system. So I think that access to justice has been an issue, because for a long time we really didn't have a lot of lawyers from different communities either. And I'm talking about the experience of an Indo-Canadian male representing Indians that have immigrated, or people from the South Asian community. But I mean, this is no different when you go into gender, or you go into sexuality. There are people that feel the exact same way. And they do, it's not just in the courtroom. They feel that in the presence of lawyers. They feel that in law firms, even firm cultures, right? And so our field as a whole, we're out there to bring justice for everyone and all that, and we talk about it. But I think that sometimes we fail to recognize that there's still a lot of work to be done in our industry as well.
Yeah, that's such a key point. Sorry, Heather, I see you want to say something. I'll finish my statement here quick so you can pipe in. But I speak Spanish. I'm fluent in Spanish, and so I've had the opportunity to help Spanish-speaking clients that maybe don't speak very good English. And unfortunately, I had to turn one away because it was going to a trial, and I don't do trials. And this one was really tough because they had been looking for a Spanish-speaking lawyer and that could help them out. And it was tough for me not to be able to help them. And I know that they're going to have a tough time finding a Spanish speaking lawyer that will be able to help them. And that language gap is, you can't overstate how significant that is, and how much of a barrier it feels like to somebody who's on the other side of that barrier and trying to access justice.
And so organizations like SABA, we exist to create some platform, not only for the public, but for lawyers within these communities who can now come out. They can, first of all, find some common ground amongst each other for help and support. You got to keep in mind that there are a lot of members of SABA who may not have been called, they may not have originally been called to the bar in Canada. So they may have been practicing law in another country, who have come here, they've completed the necessary examinations, and now they're practicing, but they may still need some assistance, and they may need some support amongst their peers and their colleagues. Similarly, a platform for the public to be able to vocalize concerns that they may have with respect to the legal system. They can now, if they're from the South Asian community, they may feel a lot more comfortable approaching an organization like SABA to let us know, so that we can champion those rights and we can champion those causes in the larger dialogue amongst the bar. I think the legal bar is filled with exceptional people, right? For the most part, I think most people have joined the field of law to do good service. Fine, whether they want to make money, all that, that's all great. But everybody wants to be good advisors. And I think that generally speaking, it's full of good people who understand that they need to keep their minds open and their ears open to listen to what minorities are speaking about, and making sure that they're getting the same fairness that we've learned about in principle in school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Heather, what's on your mind?
I just have a lot of thoughts floating around, I guess. I think about the experience of a lot of clients coming to a lawyer's office in the first place and being maybe intimidated by being downtown and having to have found a parking spot and then trying to find the address and getting upstairs and not knowing what they're even facing upstairs with a lawyer, and there's intimidating furniture and there's forms to fill out, all of those things to even get into a lawyer's office, never mind fast forward to being at that courthouse at some point or another, is just can be so overwhelming. So, there's so many points where we as lawyers can really be thinking about the people and the humans in front of us that are coming to us for help and guidance, and to make sure that we're truly doing that, guiding them through the process and thinking about their individual needs in that situation.
Yeah.
Like these type of podcasts are a perfect way to start breaking some of those barriers, right? Like if people start to realize that there is more approachability, even by listening to something like this, and then realizing that, oh, actually, I can relate to these people, they won't feel as intimidated. But when you watch TV and movies and you see lawyers, they're usually presenting themselves as intimidating individuals, right? I think the average person doesn't think that the average person thinks that their lawyer is able to fight them with words, is able to be a good wordsmith and outsmart them, etc. I think that some of that comes from the perception of Hollywood, right?
Yeah, buying justice.
Yeah.
Is a component of that I'm the regular person, I'm the non-lawyer, and I see that all the time on TV. You need money to buy yourself justice. So I think your organization is amazing because people can go and ask questions and get educated and know that they do have a fair shot if they have something that they need to bring to the table. Absolutely.
And when I talked about walking into a courtroom and being intimidated because nothing seems familiar, well, organizations like SABA are definitely going to promote that multicultural individuals be looked at as the next appointments for judges, that more women are looked at as as potential appointees for judges and for positions of authority within the law. And of course, I think now is most relevant time to talk about it. But people from the LGBTQ community, they want representation as well, and they should have representation as well. So seeing future judges and future crown prosecutors, future chief justices, etc., they should they definitely have to start taking the whole community into account. And this is only going to happen by having organizations, whether it's SABA or another organization out there, making sure that this is known, that this is an actual concern. And so the diversity in the courtroom is going to result in more empathy towards certain circumstances, but it's also going to create comfort in the legal system for people that are maybe not comfortable right now.
I'm glad you mentioned judges. We have probably the best judge we've had in my lifetime on the Supreme Court of Canada was a female who was from, I think she graduated from the U of A, Justice McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Who knew that Alberta was so forward thinking that way, that we would produce such a great female judge?
Oh, absolutely.
And I mean, female have nothing to do with it, but such a great judge. And what do you think about the newest Supreme Court appointment?
Well, it's interesting. So Justice Jamal is obviously, it's a moment of pride for lawyers who basically are of color. I think all of us wondered when there was going to be a person of color on the Supreme Court of Canada. That being said, there's been a fair bit of diversity in terms of religious backgrounds, and I think there's a good split of gender and whatnot. But it's a big thing to see a person of a visible minority end up on there. Again, for all the same reasons I talked about, right? Diversity on the bench is a good thing. It'll allow different perspectives, and especially when decisions are being made by a group of lawyers, a group of judges, it allows one judge to potentially give a different perspective. We've had some great judges on the Supreme Court already, and I know we will maintain that tradition. But what was cool about Justice Jamal in addition is that he also has roots to Alberta. His family owned a small business in Edmonton. He went to Ross Shep High School, graduated in Ross Shep. I think he did one of his summers as a law student in Alberta as well. So pretty neat to have some roots there as well. And I'm looking forward to. I tend to like reading the judgments that come out. I'm looking forward to seeing what his input is going to be and how things move forward. And I imagine there's going to be more changes as time goes on, and more additions to the bench that creates even more diversity. But that's Canada, right? We pride ourselves on our multiculturalism, and it's good to see it in every avenue. I think we already see it in many avenues. We see it in politics, right? I think just a couple of years ago, a good chunk of the cabinet ministers were you could pick a country and you'd find someone who had a role as either an MP or a cabinet minister within our federal government as well. So progress has definitely been made. It's just there's always work to do. There's always more that we can do.
Yeah, I think in the legal field, it's so the cultural background is so important. Canada is growing not by birth rate; it's growing by immigration.
Yeah,
and more not from Europe.
Yeah,
right. Not from Western Europe. People are coming from Asia more and more, whether that's India, China, and Africa as well. Like in Edmonton, we have a strong African population as well. And so those cultures they're not the same as Canadian culture.
Yeah.
And they're very, very different. And so to be able to have people in the legal system that understand, that have that cultural understanding,
yeah.
You can't, that is so important to help somebody, to give them the competent advice that they can understand.
Yeah, and it works both ways too, right? Like I think that it wouldn't be fair to say that if you're from one of those communities, you should find a lawyer from that community, and that because they'll know how to represent you best. Like ultimately, it's a case by case scenario. So there may be times where they don't necessarily need that empathy or compassion about a particular cultural issue, right? Like a basic civil dispute between two companies has nothing to do with what country you're born in or what religion you are or like what the cultural practices are. So, but the thing is it's just it's the availability to know that you can find people that may know something that applies to your particular circumstances. I look at Heather, in family law, it's something that I tend to see a lot of, where I get a lot of phone calls from people within the Indo-Canadian community who all they know about me is that I'm a lawyer and that I have an Indian background. And so they assume that I practice family law. So they'll call and want me to help. And I don't practice. We have lawyers here that I can refer them to, but they tend to say, but they'll say, they're like, oh, I'm sure they're a good lawyer, but they don't understand like how divorce works in our community. And then you say, well, no, I get that. And then you look at the bar. You look at the bar in Edmonton, and there aren't a lot of family lawyers that are from the Indo-Canadian community. So, your choice is either you go to one of the few that are there, or you make sure that you go to a lawyer that comes highly recommended, who hopefully will be recommended by someone who says, hey, look, these people are open-minded, they'll understand, and you can explain it to them. And we still hear crazy stories about what's happening back home in the same divorce proceeding, because in certain countries it's not good enough that you're only divorced in Canada. You still have to go through your own divorce proceeding in that home country that you were married in. So having a lawyer here that understands that they're going to have to liaison with a lawyer in one of those home countries and coordinate to get everything done congruently with one another, not everybody's up for that. I think there are a lot of lawyers that say, it's not, I don't really want to do that because I don't understand it. Maybe it's a liability thing, and for some people it's just a comfort thing. Say it's not really my cup of tea. So
yeah, it's funny you mention that, because I've had a few family files with Indo-Canadian or Indian, more recently immigrated clients, and there are things that I didn't know, but I asked because I'm like, well, gold. Well, if you didn't know, gold is very important in Indian weddings. The price that I learned in an unrelated school class, that the price of gold worldwide goes up during Indian marriage season, wedding season, because they acquire a lot of gold. It's a very important part of culturally, a very important part of getting married there. So, I understood that, but I didn't understand exactly how that works or the expectations and how it's considered property and how that all works. And so, I asked them, and they told me, and then
and you can see across the board when there's misunderstanding. So I recall a case that I briefly looked at where one of the lawyers was asserting that that the gold didn't form part of property unless they were going to construe it as being dowry. And the other party was saying, well, it's not dowry, like that wasn't that was just both parties contributed the same amount of gold into the pot, and this is for the children, for their future value and all. Now, if nobody really took the time to understand the differences in the culture in terms of what was considered a cultural norm and what's considered actually illegal, even in India, which is dowry itself is illegal, right? But the thing is, if you don't take the time to really understand it, it's very hard for you to accurately represent your client, because I think the lawyers that were involved in that particular matter were trying to avoid having that gold even mentioned in the settlement documentation. and the parties are like, no, it has to be documented there. And they're like, no, because we don't know how it works and this and that. So what I'm getting at is that there's always going to be cases where someone with a similar background will be best suited for that particular area of law. I mean, it doesn't have to be, it's not just racial or gender or sexuality. I mean, there are circumstances where sometimes a farmer who's dealing with a farm enterprise wants to deal with a lawyer who has a farming background, because they feel like that lawyer is going to understand that area of law just a little bit better because there's a practicality element to it, right? And so fair enough. And if that's what gives them that comfort, then great.
Yeah, well, we've been going for a good period of time here.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, and I don't know about you, Kim and Heather, but for me, it's been great, and I really appreciate you coming on, Nitin.
No, thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any closing thoughts from you, Kim?
Nope, this is great. We haven't touched on corporate law at all. We haven't touched on, I don't think we've touched on minorities at all. Today we brought up a lot of interesting things that we'll have to revisit in the future and chat more about.
Yeah, agreed. Heather, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, this is definitely a continuing conversation and has given me a lot of food for thought. And
Nitin, anything that we didn't talk about or any last thought that you want to share?
No, I just feel like I talked a lot. I think that I hope I didn't overtake too much of the dialogue there, but no, this is very nice. It was very engaging, and hopefully the people that listen to the podcast, whether they gain some insight on the commercial side of things, or they just gained insight about what lawyers are thinking about right now, and what we need for the future. So whether it was the diversity stuff or more education elsewhere, etc. I think it's really important that the message gets out. So thank you, three, for doing what you're doing, and I think that this is a podcast that should be listened to, and I'm looking forward to listening to the other ones.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
Heather, we want to do our closing.
Yeah. This has been another episode of Access to Justice. Thanks for listening or watching. If you have any questions you would like us to address on the podcast, please send an email to accesstojustice@gmail.com. That's access with the number 2 justicepodcast@gmail.com. And we'll do our best to get you an answer on an upcoming episode. Thanks for listening.
Any information in this video is general information only and is not, nor is it intended to be, legal advice. Watching this video does not create a lawyer-client relationship. You should always seek the advice of a lawyer or other qualified professional for advice regarding your individual situation. While we take care to ensure that the information contained in this video is accurate and up to date, we make no warranties or representations as to the suitability, completeness, or accuracy of the information contained in this video. Any reliance you place on the information is at your own risk. Kahane Law Office, Merrick Law, Heather Malarick Professional Corporation, Evan Clark Professional Corporation, Evan Clark, Heather Malarick, and any guests will not be responsible nor liable in any way for any content, including but not limited to any errors or omissions in the content, or for any loss or damage of any kind incurred as a result of any content communicated in this video, whether by Evan Clark, Heather Malarick, or by a third party. Kim Mcdonald is a financial advisor with Raymond James Limited. Information provided is not a solicitation, and although obtained from sources considered reliable, is not guaranteed. The view and opinions contained in this media are those of Kim Mcdonald, not Raymond James Limited. Securities-related products and services are offered through Raymond James Limited, member Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Insurance products and services are offered through Raymond James Financial Planning Limited, which is not a member Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Raymond James advisors are not tax advisors, and we recommend that clients seek independent advice from a professional advisor on tax-related matters.
Graceful fingers intertwine, comfort gladden